Hey everyone, and welcome to the Let's Get Chattin podcast, where we chat about lifestyle and psychology. My name is Brianna.
And I'm Crystal, and today let's get chatting about grief and technology. Before we dive into today's episode, I just want to remind everyone we are on social media. We are Let's Get Chattin Podcast on Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify, and just Let's Get Chattin on TikTok. We post updates on there weekly, so feel free to follow and subscribe. Now let's dive into today's episode.
We have to give credit where credit is due. This idea did come from another podcast titled Hi-Phi Nation. And the episode that inspired us was called The Digital Future of Grief. This was one of like the craziest podcast episodes I've ever listened to. Highly recommend the channel and like any of their episodes, really. It's like a philosophy type vibe, but yeah. I will read the summary. I highly urge anyone listening to just listen to that podcast so you have an idea of why we're even talking about this. But I'll also read just like the brief summary that's on Spotify for their episode titled The Digital Future of Grief. When Justin's mom was diagnosed with cancer, he knew he wanted to keep talking to her after she died. So together, they made an AI version of her, training it on her speech patterns and memories. Now he's scaling his findings so that anyone can continue their relationships with loved ones after their deaths. Justin even believes that this can one day lead to digital immortality. Grief experts are only now dealing with the bereaved people who create digital versions of their loved ones. We look at what they say about the phenomenon and what philosophers think about whether the best AI version of a person can actually be them. That's like a little bit insane. What did you think of it when you listened?
I was listening to it and I was like, not shocked, because I was like, this makes sense. What they were doing and what they were trying to do makes sense. But I was like,
it feels otherworldly.
Yeah, it doesn't feel real, but it can feel real, which is scary.
Yeah.
And grief is a normal human experience, and they're taking that away.
We'll actually get to that, because I think that's one of the most interesting parts of all this, in my opinion. And I don't know how I feel about, I'm leaning much more toward a certain opinion, but yeah. Cannot wait to get into that conversation, because that's a whole other thing. But the actual way that like the AI tech works in relation to grief is like crazy to me. So let's chat a bit more about that and like the potential to impact the grieving process. So what exactly is the relationship between AI and grief? Due to advancements in AI, the ability to essentially reanimate the dead has become possible. So let's try and break this down as easy to understand as possible. Put kind of simply, deep learning AI models, for example, like ChatGPT, can be used to recreate the essence of the deceased by feeding these models with data. The data that's fed to AI consists primarily of past conversations, along with other data related to how the deceased would communicate. So this includes text messages, voice messages, even like voicemails. In the Hi-Phi Nation episode, Justin had done like interviews with his mom, so I'm pretty sure he used like transcripts as a piece of data. So anything that sort of gives AI information about how that person would speak. So by feeding AI data like this, it allows these deep learning models to collect it learn to recognize patterns such as phrases that the individual would use in conversation, quirks in their conversation style, their views and opinions on certain things, etc. In doing so, the AI eventually comes to learn how the deceased person communicates with the user or the loved one when they were alive, and therefore it's able to replicate their persona, so to speak. You shaking your head.
Yeah, because this is just like
crazy.
Yeah.
I know. Once these AI models have learned how to accurately replicate the essence of the loved one that passed, they're able to then communicate with the user / loved one whenever they please in a manner that is, if not identical, at least extremely close to the way the deceased would. Accurately enough, in other words, to make the user feel as though they are truly speaking to their loved one. These AI models have come to be known as ghost bots. So, in summary, ghost bots exist to provide the user with the continued presence of the deceased by replicating their presence through conversation, which is conducted based on data from the deceased. Which is like, I don't know. This is hard for me to wrap my head around. Like, I already have always felt weird about AI and like the unbelievable things it can do. But this feels like menacing almost. Like it I don't know.
And I think there's a fine line between when you go into this type of technology, what's real and what's not, right? You're already hearing about people falling in love with AI and having a relationship with AI. Now you're taking something that's real and making it artificial in a way that still seems real. Like, that person's not real, they're gone.
See, but this is another point of conversation that I don't want to forget. And I don't know if I actually made a note about it, but I want to go back to that because they said something in the podcast that was really intriguing. But anywho, so technology like ghost bots are known currently as grief tech, AI technology that offers like these services to cope with the loss of a loved one. And this includes, but is not limited to, like text messaging with the ghost bot, audio messages based on voice data like voicemails and videos. Grief tech often works through a subscription-based system where users can subscribe for X amount a month and then have access to, whatever services, so there's different tiers from what I read. So if you pay this amount, you get just messaging, or if you pay, a higher amount, you can also have access to audio, messages with that person or the ghost bot. But yeah. So, I mean, it'd be unfair to not acknowledge that there are extremely varying opinions on this.
Yep.
There are experts even who think that this can very much aid the grieving process. And there are also experts who say that this is an extreme detriment to the very experience that is grief. Mm-hmm. So let's look at both sides. How has grief tech and ghost bots helped the grieving process? Grief tech has been praised by some for its ability to aid the grieving process. So Jaron Rocks, who is the founder of the ghost bot service Seance, says that his software is simply intended to provide a sense of closure and that it's not meant to be used as something, in quotations, super long term. However, founders of other ghost bot services tend to or have disagreed with this. Justin Harrison, who is the founder of the ghost bot service You, Only You Virtual, who is also in the Hi-Phi Nation episode that we listened to, he proposes that we never have to say goodbye to those we love. He says his ultimate hope is to eliminate grief as an emotion, which some would argue is a positive to grieving by just eradicating having to grieve at all. Grief tech also has potential to be used as part of grief counseling to enhance the process. One ethical issue, though, is, related to these possible positives is marketing these services to obviously vulnerable users. That can be problematic. So, question for you. When it comes to the ethics part of grief tech, I'm asking even though I already know your answer. Where do you stand and which view do you agree with more and why?
Yeah, I definitely don't think the positives outweigh the negatives when it comes to this kind of technology, especially the fact that it's marketed to vulnerable people. A lot of people can deal with grief in a quote unquote normal way and get over it, or learn to live with the change of losing a loved one. There are some people where they lose someone and, everything turns around for them. And I think, especially for those individuals, they would be more likely to use services like this. And then I'm all about dealing with the problem or whatever you're dealing with on hand. You're not dealing with it with the service. With the first guy you mentioned, the Jaren Rocks, who said it's something just supposed to be short term,
for the sake of closure.
Use it for closure. That's not real closure, I want to argue. Because sure, you may be anticipating what that person would say and using technology with text messages and transcripts and whatever else you have to give what that person says. But everyone is human and everyone can change what they want to say. Like, they don't always say what you think they're going to say. And the AI is not going to pick that up.
So that is an interesting point because yes, like we develop and we change views, blah, 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 blah. So some would say, exactly, you're right. Therefore, its use is intended only short term.
Yeah, but your closure you're getting is fake. Like, whatever closure they're seeking, whether that be they need to have a last conversation with that person. They need to tell them they loved him. I was just about
to say, so what about in a scenario where grief technology and things like ghost bots are able to, someone experienced a very traumatic loss in the sense that whatever events occurred, and the most hard part for that person is the fact that they didn't get to say goodbye. One could argue, and I could even I maybe can agree with the fact that in a setting such as grief counseling, if technology like this is utilized to give that person closure in the form of a goodbye that they wouldn't otherwise be able to receive, that could be beneficial. That could make the difference between that person being able to accept that loss and move on with their life and not being able to.
Yeah, and I understand.
How do you feel about that?
The power of the mind is very different. In some aspects, I want to argue this kind of gives placebo in a way. In terms of like...
Yeah, I think...
It's not
that's
real
the intention.
Closure, but you can do it and that works. I think personally for me, knowing that I'm not speaking to my real loved one would just make it not beneficial to me at all. But for someone else who uses the experience to the full potential, it could help. Do I think that's right though? I don't know.
What do you mean when you say real closure?
Real closure in the sense...
As an organic closure? Like from the loved one when they were alive?
Yes, like authentic. Yeah.
Because I like, spoiler alert, agree with you, but I'm like, to play devil's advocate, so one could say you're incorrect to say it's inauthentic. One would say, does authenticity mean it has to be the original person? And if you can't decipher between the way the original person talked and the way that their ghost bot talks, then isn't authenticity just the essence that that person gives off? So if the essence can be replicated, it's just as authentic.
But people have freedom, right? And by you create, or not you, but in general,
Yeah.
this creation of the AI, you're taking away that person who passed away's freedom, in a sense that this chat box or whatever is being used to mimic the person is not asking the person for consent in a way of, I'm going to give this response to this person. Are you okay with that? They're just going to do it based on what they said on in the past. Right?
Yeah.
And like, I think we can all agree the way we think and what we say is not always the same. So, especially if someone wants something really emotional like closure, what that person may actually have said to you could be different from what they usually say day to day. Oftentimes,
It
I'm going to
probably will
argue.
be.
It will be. So you're going to hear their typical response when in reality, when there's such deep topics and deep conversations that need to be had, their typical response won't cut it.
Yeah. I wonder in the case of like, what was his name? Justin? Because he had conversations with his mom for this before she died. So I'm sure they spoke about grief a lot. So if his ghost bot was fed a lot of data about speaking about grief, maybe her ghost bot would know how to would respond super accurately to how she would have herself if she was alive.
Yeah, possibly. But I also think we can never truly feel and think the same way unless we're in that situation.
Yeah.
Like we can talk about when we're gone, but until we're actually gone, we won't know.
What we say, yeah.
We can talk, like for us, we can talk about what we think marriage will be like and hear about it from other people.
Yeah.
But until we're actually married, we won't know. And I think the same thing applies to this. And for he wants to kind of eliminate grief entirely. And that I don't think is right. Like it might feel better.
Yeah.
But you're taking away a part that is human.
That we'll touch on. And you also said something really interesting about consent, which we will also touch on because, yeah, we'll just get there. I don't even want to jump the gun, but you're bringing up just like really good points. Oh, I also have to ask you this because I'm just curious. What do you think about the idea itself of a digital afterlife?
No. Digital afterlife? Like, I know people like to play God all the time, but it has to stop somewhere.
Okay.
We don't know what that's like. That's the one thing everyone has in common. We're all going to die, but we don't know.
But you can live on through AI.
No. I'm sorry. What's your God? Your God.
Yeah. Valid.
Like, I don't know. Some people talk to spirits and stuff, so maybe there's like a bridge gap somewhere.
That's what I'm saying.
But I'm not advocating for that. I'm not messing with the spiritual world.
Valid. Okay. Yeah, that's fair. The idea of digital afterlife and digital immortality, terrifying to me. That's actually terrifying. I think I'm also on the page. I'm not even not even coming from a religious standpoint. I'm just like, once I'm gone, because I don't mess with the juju, the energy of the universe. The spirits would come from me or something. I don't know about that.
Yeah, like regardless of what you believe or whether you believe anything at all, it's just,
it feels like the organic, natural way of like human beings. But I can like, anytime I say things like that, I can hear like a rebuttal in my head. Some people would be like, well, if we just stayed stuck to the way things always were, then there are a lot of advancements that wouldn't be made. So what if digital immortality is one of those that just needs to be explored? And what if it can change everything? Which is true. I can't even say anything.
But like, how is that going to work? Because I'm thinking about someone who's like in science about to make a breakthrough and then passes away. I can see the benefit of like communicating with them and seeing where like they plan to go with their project and then finishing it for them. That would save scientists a lot of time.
Yeah.
But how are you going to do that? You would have to keep the brain awake.
Well,
and that's not ethical.
What if in the future we just start like chipping our brains, and that way that chip can be put into like a computer system, and like then that's how our AI continues? Was there a movie like that?
Like what's the movie we watched? The Creator?
Oh, The Creator.
Where it wasn't necessarily minor spoiler alert, I guess.
Sorry.
I know if my brother's listening, he's going to be really angry that I'm going to say this.
Maybe we won't. I feel bad.
But there was a way that you could like talk to a person for like 5 to 10 seconds right after they died in the movie. So like that kind of aspect on a larger scale.
Yeah. Dude.
But there's so many security issues within that. Like having your brain, your thoughts registered to some computer.
Legal issues as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's too much.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. This is just like so weird and like it's exciting to talk about, but also like so scary. Like this, I don't know. I cannot emphasize how much this episode blew my mind when I listened to their podcast. I was like, we need to talk about this. And theirs is so much better. Like listen to theirs. We're just like dabbling on their conversation and other research that we did. But okay, so how has this implicated the grieving process? So one big thing that is an implication of grief tech is post-mortem deepfakes. I'm never good at explaining AI stuff, but basically deepfakes are post-mortem deepfakes are a type of AI that's used to like replicate the likeness as in the appearance of a person that has passed away. So have you heard of deepfakes before? Yeah. Yeah, where they'll put like Trump's face on like Putin. Yeah. So that, but with people who have passed. After likeness is replicated, you can replace another individual's face with the face replicated by AI. There are questions surrounding how law would deal with postmortem deepfakes and even just technology like ghost bots, regarding the consent of multiple parties involved. Some states have recently mandated, I believe New York being one of them, regulation. Yeah, they've mandated regulations, and now cybersecurity experts are recommending policies such as do not bot me clauses in estate planning processes. If those listening don't know what estate planning means, just like your will, your, post-death wishes, et cetera, et cetera. So, hypothetical scenario for you. I made up these names. These are not people. Sarah's mother has passed, and Sarah wants to utilize the existence of grief tech to aid her along the grieving process. She wants to use GhostBot AI technology, but before her passing, her mother signed a legal "do not bot me" clause. Despite her mother's wishes, Sarah still wants to use a ghost bot of her mother. So the reason I made up this hypothetical is because I wanted to bring attention to this really sticky area of consent and the law when it comes to grief tech. So when it comes to the legalities of grief tech, whose rights do you think should be considered more, the deceased or the living loved one? Because this is an issue that legislators are currently trying to grapple with.
I think it should be the deceased, given that they have stated it in their will or whatever form of legal issue they have for when they're passing. Unfortunately, if it's not stated, well, I don't know, because this is like changing someone's identity in a way, right? Like you're putting someone's identity in a new phase of technology. So I don't know if the living person has the right to do that. But in certain instances, like organ donations, right? That's something that's stated before you die. And
if it's not, next of kin is asked.
Exactly. So I wonder if it would be something like that, where whoever's your next person to make the decisions for you would be able to make this decision. But I just think put it in your will and make it easy. Make it easy for yourself and what you want, to make sure what you want gets carried out. But also to not put your loved one in that position of having to make a decision for you that you might not want. Like, for example, if Sarah has a sibling and that sibling was in charge of all the decisions for the mom and Sarah wants to use GhostBot, now that sibling has to be like, well, I don't know what my mom would want. Would she want to be using this, or should I just, let Sarah use GhostBot so she can grief, right? Like, I don't know. I definitely think it should be whatever the deceased person wants.
Okay.
Like, that's my end goal. But in that situation where the deceased person has not stated it, I don't know if it's fair in this specific situation for the loved one to make that call.
So they asked there was a similar conversation had in the Hi-Phi Nation episode. Yeah. And from my limited, like, I'm no lawyer, took some classes, sure. But from my understanding, if it's not stated, it is up to like the next of kin. So, and some people are like, well, is that fair though? And I don't, like, my first answer was like, well, like, it's the deceased and their likeness, their essence. Like, they should have a say as to whether or not they want that replicated in like grief technology. And if I think do not bot me clauses will be very essential in estate planning in the upcoming years.
Yep.
If you feel strongly about that and you don't want that, or if you're okay with your loved ones, doing what they need to do and having a goodbye that maybe you may not be able to offer in the future, cool. But in scenarios where nothing has, been legally prepared, I almost am like, the living person is the one still alive, like, and they're the one grieving. It's almost like maybe they do have the right to decide. Like,
see, that's where I have to disagree. I don't think just because you are the living person that what you say about that person is the beyond and end all, especially for something like this. Like, you're putting someone into technology.
But if they never said what they would have wanted, though, like if they didn't know that it existed,
so you don't know if they wanted it or not.
So you can't make a decision.
Exactly. I think you can't make a decision because it's not fair. Like, if some people just didn't know this was possible, I can guarantee a huge chunk of them, some people might think it's cool and want to do it, but a lot of them would be like, no, especially with the dangers that can come with it. Like, I think it's dangerous. Your loved one could be talking to you forever and then blur the line between
whether like them being here and them not.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where I think it's scary and it's not good. And I don't think the small benefits per se of using it outweigh that potential. Yeah. Right? So, like, just because a person's gone, I don't think you can use them in a way
that they may not have wanted.
Exactly.
So if you don't know what their wishes were, you shouldn't be allowed to use it, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Like, unless someone has consented to doing it, which I think is why, if this is becoming not the norm, but
it's becoming available.
Yeah. Then there should definitely be something along the lines of, like, you fill out an organ donor form, you make your will.
There needs to be legalities behind it. Yeah. That's why I thought it was funny when you brought up consent, because I'm like, oh, we will get there. But yeah, I don't know. I think if someone left wishes regarding this, you abide by their wishes. And if they didn't, I think the person who's alive gets to make the decision that they want. I don't know. It's hard. One last thing to chat about. What do professionals have to say regarding grief technology, digital immortality, and ghost bots? So Joanne, I'm not going to pronounce her last name correctly. I apologize. Joanne Cacciatore. She is a trauma and bereavement counselor. She worries that ghost bots will, and this is more of an American context because she is an American counselor. She worries that ghost bots will further the American tendency to avoid and distract from grief rather than processing it, which was very similar to what you were saying.
Yeah.
She insinuates that grief tech, such as ghost bots, can distract us from our legitimate, honest experience of grief and loss. She also says that there are some losses that individuals never recover from, and that in these cases, the grief just has to be integrated into the person's life. So also insinuating that, you know, grief tech is not the way to go. This person has to just, you know, go through the motions, basically. She says, ideally, individuals in these situations should make space in their lives to be with grief and to re-grieve as much as necessary for the rest of their lives, physically, emotionally, and socially. And a quote from her, if we spend our lives avoiding, ditching, and sidelining grief, we will pay the price for it. So I just thought that was kind of a good place to leave it off and ask as a final question, like, your summarizing take on all of this and what Joanne had to say about it.
Yeah, I think what she had to say about it is exactly how I feel and what I think. In this world, especially where we are in society now, I think everyone likes things quick, and we're getting into taking too many shortcuts.
The path of least resistance for everything and anything. Yeah.
Yeah. And her saying, if we do this, we will pay for it, I agree with. I think every action has a consequence, and every shortcut has repercussions for doing something quick that needed more time to process. Avoiding grief as a whole can lead to avoiding other things in your life and creating false narratives for something that no longer exists. I think it can be dangerous. I think it can be not helpful, especially in a community aspect, if not everyone is doing what you're doing. If you have a family who's grieving over the loss of, like your example, a mother, and one sibling in grief, I think there's power in having community. Mm-hmm. And if you've lost your mother and one sibling is using a chat box and not dealing with the grief and living on with their mother through AI, and the other sibling it's about to be her birthday and they're feeling that a little bit more, and the one who's using AI goes, it's okay, just wish mom on the chat box site. Like, you're creating more conflict.
Yeah.
And more distance. And I don't see the benefit. I think people want to avoid hard things, but hard things are what shape us.
Especially emotionally taxing.
Yeah.
Experiences like grief. Yeah, I agree as well. Like, I'm very much on the wavelength of the bereavement counselor. I think once I've decided an opinion on something, I'm pretty stuck to it. So as much as I'm scared of this, I can't help but think that this is like fascinating. Like, this is gonna like change a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's going anywhere. And I think as much as I dislike it for myself, that I've sort of like mentally prepared myself for this becoming like a very common reality.
And I don't like that. Like, I agree that people are going to use this and it's going to exist, but I think it's going to make things very messy, and
it's going to psychologically, like, I don't know.
And you're playing with unknown territory. So there needs to be more, maybe laws against how this can be used.
Like, you're playing with you're playing a dangerous game. Like, you're trying to eradicate a human emotion. Like, we are wired in a certain way. And I can't help but think of like the psychological implications. Like, that's where my mind goes.
And the thing is there has to be something within that knows the difference between technology and humanity. And when you blur that line, it's like you're playing with a dangerous line.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't know.
No, I agree. I think this is all so interesting, and I know where we stand with AI. So I was like, oh, and yet another thing that AI is leaking its way into. So yeah, I don't know. I'm very interested to know what other people think of this, because such strong opinions can be had.
And I think definitely think about this and form your opinion, because if this is what's going to become available, put in whatever form you have of what you want once you're gone, whether you're okay with this happening to you or not. Because if you're not okay, you need to make that stated. And our challenge for you guys as we end today's episode is listen to the Hi-Phi Nation episode titled The Digital Future of Grief. We will have it as the first link of our sources for you guys to click and listen to. We thank you guys so much for listening. We have everything we use linked down below, and we post every other Monday. So our next episode will be released on Monday, January 27th. Until next time, let's keep chatting.
See you guys.